Welcome back for another episode of the Royal Palace. On this episode, we will be talking about a recent lawsuit which was brought by the Canal Groupe and one of its subsidiaries against Cloudflare, Google, Quad9, and Verkara before the French judiciary. This case dovetails with our two-part series on Minitel, particularly insofar as it exemplifies the difficulties of regulating the World Wide Web and the interesting ideological contradictions of a free and open internet, as well as how nation-states, including the United States, are attempting to assert state authority and power over the internet after kind of years of just allowing this system to take over the world.
To eliminate rules that don't make sense.
It's the usual French talk, stall and surrender.
All scientists, dinosaurs, are footprints.
The cultural hold of the nation.
You Americans have given us such surrender. The sense was very easy. Make our planet great again.
For those who aren't familiar, which I imagine most Americans aren't really familiar with the Canal Groupe, they might have heard of Studio Canal if they're film buffs. Basically, the Canal Groupe is a diverse media conglomerate. They own Studio Canal, which is, I think, the biggest film studio in France. They own Canal Plus, which is a major cable channel. And they also own, the one that we focused on in our French media episode, CNews, which is sort of France's answer to Fox News, I suppose, or even maybe further right than Fox News. And Canal Plus is owned by Vavendi, and ultimately by the Bolloré family, who, again, we dove into Vincent Bolloré somewhat in depth on that episode, and you can also read about that on our website, royalpalacemedia.com/thefrenchmedia. Vincent Bolloré, industrial and media giant. I can't remember who we compared him to as an American figure. He's like Rupert Murdoch, but also with industrial base and colonial extraction of African resources. So France is a smaller country, so they got to sort of meld multiple types of billionaire into one.
Yeah, that's right. And, as we said on our Minitel series, right, there's kind of this this fact that, like, the World Wide Web is kind of difficult to regulate at a nation-state level, right? But that its expansion across the world has for a long time been in the interest of countries like the United States, because it allows them to disseminate, journalism and information that kind of goes along with American ideology. And I think, I don't know how much you've been following the news lately, Liam, but there's been several kind of examples, I think, of even the United States kind of going back on that stance and trying to assert itself over the internet. For example, several states, I believe 14, have introduced age verification requirements on pornography websites.
Really?
Yeah. So, like, in some states, you actually have to provide a photocopy of your ID in order to access Pornhub. The UK has recently done something similar as well. And there's also a proposed law called the Foreign Anti-Digital Piracy Act, which was introduced just last week by California Representative Lofgren, a Democrat, which essentially is going to try and do something similar as this case we're going to be talking about in this episode. But then we also have the TikTok ban. Did you experience that?
Did I experience it? Well, I don't live in the US or use TikTok. So
there you go. But that's actually the thing. So there's kind of this idea that, we don't need to worry about internet censorship because we have a VPN, we have Tor, there's no problem, you can always get around this stuff. But the TikTok ban proved that that's not actually the case, because people even living outside of the United States, but for which ByteDance could attribute to, like, Americanness of your account, they also blocked that because they were so concerned about compliance.
Really?
Yeah. People who were like, I heard an anecdote of someone living in Japan, but whose phone was originally bought in the US or maybe originally registered in the US, getting blocked because of a more sophisticated system that ByteDance chose to implement because they didn't want to get hit by the insane penalties that the Congress imposed if they didn't shut down.
Do you think ByteDance was also trying to implement it as broadly as possible for PR reasons there? I mean, they did a pretty good, like, I saw that when they removed from the US App Store, there was some, like, notification that came up saying that, TikTok is disabled in the US, but thankfully President Trump has promised to restore it after taking office. Like, I feel like they might have been trying to make a PR play there, because they know that doesn't sit well with their users.
Sure, but I think I think there's a technical misconception here, which is that regulating the internet from a technical perspective is really difficult, or impossible even, and that there's real simple solutions like VPNs to get around this stuff. And in fact, a lot of kind of like censorship, quote unquote, or regulation can be contravened by a VPN, but that's almost like an election, right? Like companies can go a lot further to comply with the law if the law was enforced perhaps to its full ability, or if new laws were to be passed to go even further. So like with this pornography thing, for example, like, yes, a VPN can get you around the ID verification for the moment, but if states wanted to put more pressure on Pornhub, for example, they probably could require them to do much more thorough investigation into every connection in order to verify it's legitimately a out-of-state connection.
That wouldn't be great for their business. Imagine if they required you to upload your ID. I mean, which, like, YouTube, at least here in Spain, I noticed this recently with, like, I tried to watch a YouTube video that was marked as, age inappropriate or whatever. It's just like like a music video or something. And it said, verify your age. And I was like, what? I mean, I'm signed in. I guess now in Spain, you need to provide an ID. So with Pornhub, who the hell would want to upload their ID to Pornhub no matter what age you are?
Yeah, what's really shocking about this is, to me at least, there's kind of two narratives, especially on the age verification thing. You have on one side people who are like, this is necessary to protect the children or whatever, but it's likely a lot of these people actually just don't like porn at all and want it banned. And so this is kind of like a way to do that, a way to do it undercover, if you will, or a way to do it on the low. But there's also a technical thing here, which is there are ways in which you can like do verification of your age without actually providing to websites like Pornhub or YouTube your actual ID. But it's mostly a laziness on part of governments and lawmakers to require those methods. We're not going to get into it here, but like, zero trust proofs are a great example of how you can technically implement something where we can verify that you are in fact over 18, but without actually providing Pornhub any actual information about who you are or how old you are, and without the government knowing that you access Pornhub. But there just doesn't seem to be any political will in doing it the right way. In fact, in the UK, there was a semi-good privacy-preserving way of doing this kind of age verification that was not ultimately implemented, but I think should have been. And the idea was basically you would go to a pub, right, where they check your ID anyway, and then they would give you a code, basically, or like a password, or a token, if you will, that would allow you to verify to Pornhub that you're above 18. Because Pornhub would be like, show me a token, and then you'd provide the token. But the actual link between that token and your identity is not like saved in any database, right? The bartender just generates the code for you. And that would have been a great way of doing it, right? But they chose to go, no, just upload your ID.
So let's talk about this case. So I mentioned briefly who Canal Plus are. Think kind of think Comcast. They're kind of like that, except they're not whatever. They don't provide internet, but whatever. They're a big media company, the biggest in France. Who's on the other side of this?
On the other side, as I mentioned in our introduction, we have Cloudflare, Google, Verkera, and Quad9. Now, particularly Google and Cloudflare, these are two major internet companies. Obviously, we all know Google, but Cloudflare, believe it or not, powers like most of the internet, like most of the infrastructure of the internet.
Can you explain that for a second? Because I've heard of Cloudflare. I feel like you say their name come up all the time, but as a non-tech person, I don't really know what they do.
So Cloudflare, and this is kind of funny, it's like they are very much a motor of centralization of the internet, because basically DDoS attacks, denial of service attacks, used to be a big problem with the internet. It's basically when a computer or a bunch of computers send a lot of bad or just a lot of requests to a server. So Liam's hosting, I don't know, trainlover.com or whatever, and it's just on his local computer. So I, as a bad guy, am going to make his website or make his server crash by sending way too many requests than he can handle directly to his server. And this was a big problem, especially like 2000 to 2012-ish, I would say, was kind of the peak of DDoS attacks, where you would just have like government websites go down for a few hours or hospital websites go down for several hours, maybe even a day, because some kids thought it would be funny to use a botnet or use their own network to try and take down their websites. And it was pretty trivial in many cases. Now, Cloudflare came up with this idea that like, well, I have an idea. Let's just centralize all that, where basically we stand as the front to your website. Like we stand in front of your website, and we use our massive global network to route traffic that's coming to your website to your server, so that you don't need to deal with when you get an attack like this, you don't have to deal with all that traffic. We'll handle it for you. And this works well because they manage like probably 30% or at least of the internet in this way. And so when attackers come after your website, they have to go up against the entire Cloudflare network. And there have been, Cloudflare is always under attack, actually. And they've been able to absorb massive DDoS attacks. But ultimately, this means that most websites don't suffer as many of these kinds of attacks as they used to. The problem with this, obviously, though, is by centralizing everything in Cloudflare, imagine what a position Cloudflare has to monitor traffic. Imagine the kind of data they're taking in. Often, you kind of have to allow them to, the technical ability, I'm not saying they're doing it, but the technical ability to decrypt data that's going over their network. Our website works like this. We use Cloudflare precisely for this purpose. Keeps our site online and against DDoS attacks. It allows us to take advantage of their large network that allows you to cache like images, for example, in the region our users are in, so that if someone in China wants to visit our website, they don't have to suffer the latency of reaching France, right? Instead, they get to view a cached version of the image thanks to Cloudflare's network. So that's Cloudflare. They do a lot of other things, but like that's their core of their business model. Mm-hmm. Now, Quad 9 is a bit different. All they do is something called DNS, and we'll get into that in a second. But that's actually the through line of all these companies for the purpose of this case. They all do something called DNS. So in the complaint, Canal Plus alleges that several websites offer free and unlicensed streaming of sports content, and as they were so courteous as to include in that complaint, I can read off some of those URLs to you. So there's antennasports.ru, boxtv60.com, livetv802.me. So those are just a few of the domains that they mention in there. And these are basically websites that allegedly, according to Canal Plus, allow you to stream sports for free. And this is, of course, illegal because there's a company that in France that has a license, exclusive license, to allow users to stream, they charge for, obviously, to stream sports events like the Premier League, for example, online. And Canal Plus is essentially alleging that, these websites are doing streaming piracy and that they need to be effectively blocked for users, right? They don't want users to be able to access these websites in France. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is they're not actually able to take down the people hosting these websites. I'll explain why. So antennasports.ru is hosted in St. Petersburg, right? So they have no realistic way of forcing the Russian authorities to take down this website. So instead, they want to block it for French users by going to people who provide DNS services. So this is, I think, where we have to kind of get into what is DNS.
Yes.
So the function of DNS is actually really simple. It's like the internet's phone book. When a user wants to get in touch with, say, google.com, they need to, the internet works on what we call IP addresses. and it doesn't actually know, like when you type in google.com into your web browser has no idea where Google is, what IP address it lives on. So we need a server that can answer that query, that question. So it's like a big phone book in that sense. And the way like this is done for most consumers is your internet service provider. So I don't know, Mobistar, Comcast, whatever you have, depending on where you're living. Usually, they are going to be the ones who choose who you get that information from, and usually it's them. So I thought it'd be kind of fun, Liam, for you to tell me who you get your DNS from. Go to ipleak.net.
Okay.
And then do you see where it says DNS servers?
DNS addresses 4 servers detected.
Okay, read the company name under it.
Well, it's the name of my DG Spain Telecom SI, which is the sketchy low-cost Romanian telecom company I use.
Okay, so perfect. So you, in fact, are using the domain name resolution service of your ISP. Now, the reason that's important is because they are based in Spain and under Spanish law. So if the Spanish government says, Liam, we don't want you accessing antennasports.ru, what they can basically do is say, hey, Spanish ISP, do me a favor, don't answer when Liam asks for that website. So let's go and test to see whether or not you in Spain, if Canal Plus has gotten to the Spanish ISP you use.
Okay.
So back in terminal, type in NS lookup, one word,
Okay.
antennasports.ru.
Gave me a server and an address.
Okay, so you can access that website. The Canal Plus has not made it to blocking illegal Premier League access in Spain, or your ISP hasn't complied if they have. So as you can see, like DNS is like very central to the internet because it basically is a key point where censorship can be enacted, where regulation can be enacted. And it's also a kind of a place for surveillance because your ISP is, of course, they know who you are, right? Because they're the ones who give you access to the internet. If you are querying their servers, all your queries go to them. And you're kind of hoping that they respect your privacy in doing so. I don't know how it works in Europe. I don't know how they've managed to comply with GDPR on this question, but I know in the US it's very common to sell user queries, presumably with people's IP addresses as data brokers.
Cool.
Yeah, good stuff. So that's how it like works by default. Like if you do absolutely nothing, your DNS goes to your ISP. However, not always, because for one, browsers have started implementing something called DNS over HTTPS, which is basically encrypted DNS. Because by default, like the one your ISP provides, there's generally speaking no encryption. So someone surveilling your line, whether it's someone on the route or a wiretap, can actually see all the queries you make to the DNS server. Now, when you make queries to a DNS server, it's just where you're going. It's not what you're doing there. So if you ask your ISP's DNS service, where's Pornhub, they know you looked up where's Pornhub, but they don't know what videos you watch there, if you know what I mean, from the mere query. But obviously that information is really valuable. So obviously, we've realized that this is a big problem. The fact that DNS is generally not encrypted, but also that ISPs can censor access to certain websites or just arbitrarily block certain domains. So as a result, like a lot of browsers have by default implemented DNS over HTTPS, which essentially goes around this. It says, well, we're going to send it out as a normal encrypted web query. Now, by default, if you download Google Chrome, your DNS queries will probably be DNS over HTTPS, and they'll probably go to either Google or Cloudflare, which obviously has its own centralization problems, but whatever. Now, the thing is, though, these phone books are often opinionated. So Cloudflare, for example, generally will try and block malicious content. So if you try and go to a website that's just known for malicious content or child porn, maybe they're going to block it. But they don't block everything. And one of the things that this complaint is, of course, alleging is that Cloudflare and the rest of them are not blocking access to piracy websites. And that's important, of course, because Canal Plus doesn't want you to be able to access these piracy websites. Obviously, Google and Cloudflare are big companies, and honestly, they have the resources to kind of go through the trouble of like being like, okay, for all our users in France, we're not gonna answer this query.
Mm-hmm.
So Quad9 is a bit different because they're a nonprofit, and they kind of claim that they're doing their DNS services for like an open and safe internet. So they do go out of their way to try and block malicious content, right? Like not resolve malicious content. They have like, I believe like Cloudflare, they have a server that can kind of be more family friendly if that's what you elect to do. But they basically say that what Canal Plus wants, which is for Quad9 and the rest of these DNS providers to no longer resolve queries to these websites in France. And one of the objections that Quad9 has to that is like, we're not trying to look at user data. We don't want to know where our users are. So like, it's hard for us to comply. They say it's also kind of like shooting the messenger because like, hey, we're just a phone book. We're just a directory. Like, it's not our fault if some of the places we direct to may or may not do illegal content. And, I listened to their general manager. His name is John Todd, kind of explain their position on this, which is very much like, we believe that kind of in this like vision of a open free internet where like, yes, we have to block certain just malicious content because we don't want everyone to get viruses, but like we don't feel like we as this mere service provider that we are should be like forced to like censor these kind of queries for pirated content.
And do they have like does Cloudflare, for example, have a policy on censorship? Like, I assume that they do have some line where they won't direct you to websites hosting, child pornography or something like that, right?
They basically say, hey, we reserve the right to not resolve certain queries.
But in practice, do you know if they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially for like malicious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, most DNS providers have at least some blacklists of just known problem web servers. I mean, because there's a lot of just, there's tons of websites that are just objectively bad and offer nothing. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing. All these guys, Quad9, Cloudflare, Google, they are all doing some sort of blacklisting on their side.
Right.
The question is what? And this is where, and by the way, if John Todd, you hear this and you want to come on and talk about internet privacy and open internet and whatnot, we'd love to have you. But I do find it like a little bit inconsistent where these DNS providers always argue like, no, free open internet, we don't want to censor anything, blah, blah, blah. But of course they have the ability to, and they do. And one of the things that, in the Quad9 press release here, where they talk about their role in all of this, they kind of say, oh, well, we do not have geographic blocking methods to localize because our system is designed to treat everyone in every nation identically. And now I believe to some extent that that's true, like that their system is designed that way. But they kind of say, well, for GDPR reasons, we think it's better for us to not track the locations of our users. Now, I kind of agree with that to some extent, where it's like, I have kind of a very strict reading of GDPR where I say like, yeah, if you don't need to collect data, don't collect it at all. And I think GDPR really favors that. But the thing is in order to resolve DNS queries, you inevitably know the IP address of the person asking. And the way you figure out whether or not someone actually lives in the place that, or lives in a specific country, is just by using these databases which equate IP address to nationality. So it's not actually them collecting any more data. It's merely them querying one of those databases with your IP address, which is very common practice. I think one of the things here, though, is that they kind of have this idea, and I don't totally disagree with it, that they, as like not operating in France, not explicitly operating in France, feel that like French law is trying to impose itself on them by mere fact that their website's accessible. And they kind of have this logic of like, well, we're worldwide, but like, we should be like not subject to like individual nation laws. And you hear this a lot. Google and Cloudflare both fought this case, by the way. Like they both don't want to have to comply with French law on this question. And by the way, like, to be clear, I'm not on the side of Canal Plus here. They cite some wild statistics in their complaint. They're claiming that just piracy of this stuff is so incredibly high. And I think you see this all the time. I mean, we saw this in the US with all the DMCA stuff, especially in the mid 2000s, where they would just claim that like we've lost 80% of ticket sales, or just insane claims about the amount of loss here. And also in the complaint, they talk about these DNS servers as being like alternative, right? The idea of using Google, Cloudflare, and Quad9 is like they very much imply that this is like getting around regulation. And does it allow you to get around regulation? Sure. If they're not censoring these queries, sure. But this is very common practice. There's not every business does not use the default ISP servers. They set up their own. Nobody wants to use your ISP servers for all the reasons I outlined here.
Do you know if this has happened before? These have American media companies brought lawsuits against DNS providers related to piracy?
Yes, they've tried. But the U.S. at least historically has protected, for reasons that I believe we talked about on an earlier episode. But the U.S. has generally said like, oh, if you're a service provider, you're just a man in the middle, and you're scot-free. They've tried to kind of clamp down on this stuff in the U.S., but overall, it's not like Europe, where like in many European countries, if you're using your ISP's DNS resolver and you type in the piratebay.org or .se, you will get it won't resolve. Whereas in the US, anywhere it will resolve. So yeah, I mean, this kind of legislation doesn't currently exist in the US, but as I said, there's a law that's been proposed by the California representative I mentioned earlier, which is essentially trying to do this, but only to foreign piracy providers, interestingly. Apparently, American privacy is fine. Or piracy is fine. Kind of very much like China war logic, like anti-Russia, that whole thing, So by the way, what's the outcome of the case? Well, the outcome of the case is basically that, so there's this new law that was passed in 2021 that essentially provides like a really strong enforcement mechanism that allows, in specific case of sports piracy, allows for companies to bring suit before a court, which will essentially decide like really quickly, like in a matter of just a couple weeks. And that's exactly what happened here. The judge basically said, look, you guys block queries sometimes, so why can't you block these queries? And they ordered all these companies to block all these domains. One of the things I do find a little bit funny about this, though, is, as I said, like, I had no idea. I'm not a sports guy, okay? I'm sorry, I don't watch the Premier League. I don't know. Do you, Liam?
No, I don't.
But now I know where to get it illegally. Right? Like, now they have told, we're not going to tell you the IP addresses, obviously, but we can tell you the domains because they were in the complaint. Now I know where to get it illegally. So I just find it it's kind of this funny thing about the internet where it's like, there really is nothing they can do, because even if Cloudflare and Quad9 block this stuff, again, it's only if your IP resolves to France. So VPN will solve this, but also you can kind of run your own DNS server. Like, this has become a really common thing where there's an application called Pi-hole, and it's because you can run it on a Raspberry Pi. And you basically, what you do is you query upstream servers like Google and Quad9, and there's also dozens that essentially escape any jurisdiction, or at least European jurisdiction, and you can just download those databases, cache those databases, and therefore, if they ever block it, you still know the IP address. And obviously, this information, like, I mean, I can just share it with you. I can tell you what the IP address is, right?
The other thing about this is I think anyone, especially in the US, who has ever watched sports is familiar with these kind of websites, especially because American sports are so insane with how they like divide up the different games are on different networks. You know what I mean? It's not like you subscribe to the sports channel. Like, I don't know how it works in the US and France, but like Ligue 1, the football league, I think it's all on the same channel. I'm not sure what channel, but I think it's on the same channel. In the US with the American sports, it's not like that. You have to be like it's such a hassle to watch all these different games. So what people do is you Google, stream, sports stream of whatever game, and some website called like livetv802.me comes up. No one's like, oh, I'm a big fan. I watch all my games on livetv802.me. It's more that just there's, thousands of sites with these sort of random number names like that. Probably they're all mirrors of each other.
Exactly.
It probably doesn't even matter if they this is the funny thing about this is they're coming after 15.
I only mentioned
15. Okay. But still, that's like presumably these places just change to different mirrors all the time, just like the Pirate Bay does, and so on. I guess they're probably doing this just to sort of set some sort of precedent, and that they can just send threatening letters to these DNS providers from now on instead of actually bringing a lawsuit, right? But
yeah,
I would think there's no way to really crack down on this because because this has been done many times with piracy websites like the Pirate Bay and these big ones, right? Is blocking the domain names has zero effect because they are constantly changing domain names.
Yeah. And so what I think is really interesting. So by the way, the result of this case is the judge was very clear and said, no, you need to block this stuff, right? What I think is interesting about this case is like, one, I think a lot of people see it as like, oh, censorship, right? And there's this aspect of it here, but I do think it's also interesting about just like how this regulation ultimately escapes the nation state, at least at present, right? Like even if I agreed on the legitimacy of this kind of really strict interpretation of copyright law that the French legislature has adopted, I still feel like it's kind of exceptional. Like imagine this was in the real world, right? Like imagine I ran a phone book in which I told you like the phone numbers of drug dealers. Like obviously that's clearly illegal and everyone would agree that that's illegal. But like it's a little different in the internet because technology does, like a digital phone book is a lot different or changes in the way it works a lot. For example, a physical phone book, you can't do reverse lookup, right? But the moment you digitize a phone book, you can do reverse lookup. And yes, it's the same content, but because you've made it digital, it's different in the way you can use it because you can just take someone's number and figure out who they are, whereas no one would have done that with a phone book, right? So on one hand, you have that aspect of things, but then on the other, you have like even if like we saw this as legitimate, there is kind of nothing that a single country can really do. Like as you said, Liam, there's just going to be 15 more of these domain names up tomorrow, and they will all be resolved by your DNS provider, most likely, right?
Yeah, I feel like we've gone through this many times with big name pirate, quote unquote piracy websites, some of which they've never managed to fully shut down, like the Pirate Bay, right? The Pirate Bay still exists.
Yep.
But for example, what did happen recently is, have you ever heard of F Movies?
Nope.
It was like the go-to piracy streaming website. Not downloads, but you could just find any movie, anything on there. It was great, honestly. And it just got shut down last summer. And it kept changing domain names and stuff. But then I believe it was based in Vietnam.
Oh.
And they finally managed to shut it down by, finding out who was behind it and shutting down the servers, which is the only way any of these things ever get shut down, right? Like the domain name blocking never works.
Or getting the service, the actual hosting provider to shut it down.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these things inevitably are hosted in the cloud. I mean, do you want your personal IP to be associated with hosting a piracy website? Of course not, right? So a lot of times what they do is they spin up AWS instances, under fake identities or real ones, and just have multiple accounts and constantly move it. But I actually thought kind of like closing this out because we cut it out from the episode, but on our episode on Minitel, I think we mentioned libgen, Library Genesis, and Liam, you mentioned that they were taken down.
Yes.
And I was a little confused by that because I was like, how do you take down Library Genesis? Because do you know how Library Genesis works?
No.
So Library Genesis used to basically be like a massive library, and then what they did is they made torrents of like portions of that library. And the way you would keep it alive, quote unquote, is volunteers would just agree to seed those torrents. So if, one guy running the Library Genesis server were to be arrested and the site shut down, there would be 15 to 100 copies of that database distributed all around the world. But torrents are difficult, as you may know, because, there's so many problems with them, but it can be really hard to keep a torrent alive, like for people to always constantly be seeding it. And like not everyone wants to have, 40 terabytes of, I believe their database now is around 60 terabytes. Like all of Library Genesis, which is basically all of most books and all of academic, papers, all compressed down to like 64 terabytes or something like that. The way they do it now is through the Interplanetary File System, which is like this really kind of clever way of preserving this library, and it allows like this content to be distributed and shared on any machine that wishes to participate. So basically, like what someone can do is download IFPS, like a IFPS client on their system, and so long as the file that they downloaded from the distributed network lives on their system, we can always find it through the IFPS network, because we can identify a file through hashing, which is you just take the file contents, throw it through a hashing algorithm, which gives a unique fingerprint essentially for that file. And then anywhere in this network where people are willing to have the file shared, all you need to do is basically call out to the network, hey, does anyone have this hash? And so that has made it such that Library Genesis could probably never be taken down. Like maybe the website can go down, but the library can never go down, because there's just thousands of copies of everything in the library distributed around the world that can be pulled by their hash in any moment.
But there's not some central architecture that's needed for it?
Well, there is for the website, but not for the file storage anymore.
If the website went down, wouldn't there no longer be any way to send out those hashes or generate those hashes?
No, because that is all on IPFS.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you're right. I said that they'd been shut down because I'd heard that. I'd seen it on Twitter, but what actually happened is, I think, but a very large number of their domain addresses that everyone used were taken down. That's
correct. Yeah. So because domains are regulated depending on what they end in. That's why a lot of the piracy websites end in .ru and other XYZ, I think is a top level domain.
F-movies, the last one that they had that I'd used was fmovies.wtf. I don't know why .wtf is a top-level domain.
Yeah, because they expanded it a while ago. It was very
they
dumb.
expanded it too much. It's dumb.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, different bodies sort of oversee, especially the nation ones. Like, in France, if you want a .fr, you actually need to verify your identity and like provide your address and all types of things. And you need to prove you reside in France. You can't just get an FR if you live outside of France. And that's actually really common. But yeah, essentially, it's just their domains that fell down. So just because their domains fall down doesn't mean you can't access it, right? Because, again, everything's based on IP addresses. And then, again, even if the hosting went down, IFPS continues to exist. It's kind of remarkable. It really does. And there's a real big downside of this, by the way, which is like, it is really difficult to get rid of something in IFPS. Like, if people want your revenge porn to never die, it can survive forever on IFPS. It's, there's a lot of downsides to this technology, but that's kind of the interesting thing is this IFPS is a great example of like profound libertarian ideology built into systems, right? Like these systems are really not, conceived in this kind of like politically agnostic way. I'm not saying IFPS, I think, is technically it's genius, right? But it is profoundly libertarian, right? That there's really no mechanism to stop the proliferation of something, which is fantastic if you're into pirated content, like, but kind of bad if you feel that there's stuff on there that's illegal. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, one of the good or bad things about the internet, however you want to slice it, is that it is really hard to censor it. Like effectively.
Yeah.
I guess it's pretty easy to censor it in ways that dissuade most people from doing it, but it's no one's really gotten a an effective way to actually block things for people who want to get around it.
Yeah, and by definition, it's really hard. I mean, like it's built into the protocol for it to be hard to stop, right? Like, I mean, obviously, ARPANET, right, the predecessor to the internet, was conceived for defense purposes, and the reason it's so resilient is because they believed for defense purposes it needed to be so damn resilient. Turns out that same resiliency, though, also allows it to escape, state control to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But again, and I think we brought this up on our Minitel episode and kind of alluded to it at the beginning here, but like how long this lasts is up for debate. And I think, I think the TikTok ban is a great example of this, which is that there are much more technically sophisticated ways to censor the internet if that's what you want to do. We just haven't really seen the hegemon, the most powerful country. Cloudflare can ultimately, they're subject to these court rulings, but they enjoy a certain protection by the fact that they're based in the US, right? What happens if that protection ends? What happens if the federal government decides that, censoring the internet to prevent pornography, for example, like how does that fundamentally change it? And I think that remains to be seen.
Also, like with TikTok, an interesting thing about that is that TikTok is not primarily a website. They're primarily an app. And it's much easier to ban an app because they just have to tell the basically two platforms, Apple and Google, that host the apps to stop doing it, and they're both US based, which makes it very easy for the US to do it. Right, it's way easier for the US to do this than anyone else to do it. As you said, the internet is tending towards apps for the way most people use the internet is via mobile apps these days and less websites. I think you can access TikTok through the website. So if you're in the US, and TikTok gets banned again, we'll see if that happens. Then yeah, you can, put a VPN on your computer pretty easily and open up the TikTok website. But who's going to do that, right? That's not how people use TikTok. Instagram doesn't even let you post from their website. I think you have to have the app, for example.
Yeah. The one thing I would add, though, is like the example of the website thing. If there was a will, like if the US had meaningful power over the company that they're trying to ban, they could make it so that you couldn't use the website, or at least much, much harder. So like when you connect with a VPN and you then use your web browser to access a website, there's an insane amount of information that can be gleaned from your connection, even if it's over a VPN, right? They can say, hey, what's your time zone? Oh, your time zone is Eastern time? Interesting. Maybe US, right? And then they can use the fact that you're using English US as your default language for your web browser. I mean, they can correlate all that data together and reason that you're an American. The reason most websites don't do that is because they don't have any pressure to do that, right? But if the US changes its fundamental policy and relationship with the internet, they're the ones who have the power to affect that kind of change. And I want to just make a point about IPFS, which is that most people who use Library Genesis do not download the necessary software to interact with IPFS. So how do they do it? Well, Cloudflare, an American company, runs something called an IFPS or an IPFS gateway. And that gateway allows you to download stuff from IPFS without actually downloading the client. And most people don't have the technical skill or maybe desire yet to like go out and down. It's like torrenting, right? Like a lot of people don't, even though there's plenty of torrents available, a lot of people never go down that road because they don't even know how to download or want to download a client that you need for torrenting.
It feels more illegal. I think there's a psychological thing there too. Like it feels more illegal to go to your torrent software and download something from the Pirate Bay than to click on movies 809.ru. Like,
and
just
I was just checking out the website. I didn't mean to stream it. Yeah. I do think a lot of people think that. I do find that odd that people are like, oh, I won't torrent even with a VPN, but then they'll just like without any VPN or whatever, just access like illegalmovies.illegal.com.
Yeah.
But like imagine if the US stepped on Cloudflare and said no more IPFS gateway. well, Library Genesis to many people would no longer be accessible, like practically. Would people go around it eventually? Maybe, but like my point is just like there's a lot of like low hanging fruit here that historically the U.S. has not been willing to stomp down on.
Yeah. I want to point out that all these big censorship things, besides like the pirated going after pirating websites and stuff, all these big things like TikTok being banned in the US, most American social media being banned in China and Russia, or Russian websites like RT being banned in Europe. All of these things have been countries going after countries that are companies that are based in another country. So to what you were saying, it's like, if we get another TikTok ban, like a permanent TikTok ban again, ByteDance could crack down on people who are clearly American using a VPN. But why would they? They don't care. If they're banned from the US and they suddenly have no operations in the US and they're based in Singapore and their parent companies, or the TikTok's based in Singapore, ByteDance is based in China, why would they care? Same deal where clearly
I'll defend that, which is that unless they move to China proper, the U.S. could probably prevent them from banking.
That's true. So the U.S. has more power in this, but yeah, they could really come after them like that. But so the U.S. is sort of different. But I was thinking, with all the social media that's banned in China is very easily accessible, judging based on how much I see our mutual friend who lives in China tweeting. Because the American companies don't care at all about making sure that you're actually not connecting from China or Russia, right? Because they don't love that they're banned in those countries. They'd rather not be, so they have no interest in enforcing it. But you're right that the U.S. is in a special position because we have so much power over the global banking system, the dollar system. Just if the U.S. sanctions you, you are dead. So. Which will be interesting to happen with TikTok. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it seems like Trump realized he could get a lot of political capital from unbanning it, which was such an incredible cell phone by the Democrats, because obviously that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And even though Trump was the one who originally proposed a ban, now everyone's like, oh yeah, Biden banned TikTok, an app that I think over 100 million people in the U.S. use it, and now Trump's brought it back.
To defend Trump 1 on this point, it's when he originally came up with this ban, it was somewhat politically popular. I mean, the user base was so much lower at the time.
Oh yeah.
And what's kind of incredible is that Biden was like, oh, now that it's unpopular to do this, let's go ahead with it. Yeah. I mean, it's
classic Democratic Party. But yeah. Well, anyway, we'll see if Trump does go ahead of because I think he suspended the implementation now. But
my understanding is, from a legal standpoint, he can't stop it except for this one temporary ban. However, I mean, ByteDance might be terrified to take this approach, but I understand that the DOJ could just say, hey, we're not going to enforce this. But I guess the real big problem that I've heard about is that their hosting provider, their server provider, which is based in Texas, because they moved all their data to Texas to be like, see, we're good. We'll only sell to data brokers in the U.S., not the Chinese government, is Oracle. And Oracle is terrified. They don't want anything to do with them because they're worried that even if the DOJ chooses not to enforce, they're worried that the next administration is going to show up with the FBI and be like, we want our however billions of dollars of fines.
Yeah, and banks and advertisers and so on might be worried about that too, but I don't know. We'll see. He could also get Congress to repeal it. I think the Republican Party will do anything Trump says now, but who knows? Impossible to predict what Trump's going to do.
However, I don't know if you've seen about this whole DeepSeek thing, but Congress is maybe going to move on banning DeepSeek.
Really? The Chinese AI?
Yeah.
Chatbot? Awesome.
Which Italy just kind of did too, and oddly, this is kind of fun. The company that made DeepSeek said, we don't need to comply with GDPR. We don't operate in Europe, and of course, anyone who knows GDPR knows its global application. So, so long as an EU person is involved, you're subject to GDPR. But I think it's banned in Italy.
Yeah. This is a great trend for the U.S. to go towards, is just banning all Chinese apps that'll sort of end up in just us being the same position as China. All our stuff's banned in China, all their stuff's banned in the US. I think it will be interesting if they ban TikTok again, because TikTok has like very clearly said that they won't sell their American operations. Clearly the Chinese government, I think, would prefer that they didn't. Who knows to what extent the Chinese government actually has influence over ByteDance's decision-making process. You know, I have no idea, but clearly it'd be a big loss for them if they were banned and they didn't sell it, because they could make a lot of money, because their U.S. operations has got to be worth an incredible amount. It might be worth more than like any other social media company's U.S. operations. But if they chose not to sell it, it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, to what extent would the U.S. go after them? Because, like you said, they could, like, you know, they could just pass a law sanctioning ByteDance.
Yeah.
And really screwing them over and making it difficult for them to operate in any other country besides China, making it difficult for them to operate in Europe and so on. And, you know, they could easily do that. And it would be fascinating to see, because the U.S. really, really has incredible power in that domain. So we'll see.
You know, the whole China question is very interesting, because, like, you know, I've recently come to know more about how, like, the Great Firewall of China works, and it's really fascinating, because it's like they regulate their internet profoundly, obviously, but they fundamentally can't and choose not to cut themselves off from the rest of the world entirely. So you know, unlike, I think, North Korea, like, I think North Korea, they're basically not connected to the World Wide Web, basically. Mm-hmm. But, like, you know, China has this thing of, like, you know, reduced traffic to the outside world. They do a lot of what's called traffic shaping, where you basically say, like, hey, certain traffic, let's kind of slow down because we don't want that. But, you know, there are ways around it. But those ways are kind of so dissatisfactory that, you know, most Chinese people have no reason to kind of take those measures. It's really Westerners who are in China. And I think to some extent that's kind of tolerated, right? The Chinese government doesn't, I think, want Westerners to just completely lose contact with their family or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like, you know, they definitely don't want Facebook to take a hold over their national services. I don't know how much you know about how HTTPS works and certificates and stuff, but have you ever gone to a website and your browser screams at you saying this website's not secure or something?
Yeah,
Are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure? What that is their certificate's bad, and usually that's because they don't use industry standard let's encrypt automatic renewal of their certificates, and it's just a guy who does it and he forgot, or the website's been taken over. But basically, that certificate tells you that you are talking to the real server. It doesn't promise your connection's secure, but it's like, you know that when you go to google.com, that certificate is attesting to the fact that that's google.com and you're reaching Google servers and not an attacker. Because imagine I go to your home, Liam, and put in your, like, basically I hack your router, and make a website that looks like Google, and you dial google.com. If I don't have the private key for their certificate, I can't make your browser believe I'm really google.com. Mm-hmm. Unlike before, back in the old days when things weren't encrypted, easy to do that. That's why everyone was like, don't use public Wi-Fi. And so in China, what they do, which is very clever, is they say, in order to get a certificate for, like, a Chinese domain name, you need to go through this very intense process of where they know exactly who you are and what you want to do with the internet. And they don't allow you to open ports that are commonly associated with internet traffic. So if you can't be a server, like, you can't have a server running in China in which port 80 or port 443 is open without having gotten government approval for it. And they just, like, block it. So they can, in fact, regulate their internal market pretty well as a result of what they've done.
Interesting. Could the U.S. do that now, or is it too late? Is it like there's too many servers out there or something?
You know, so the way HTTPS in particular, which again is how everyone is accessing just websites, works, is kind of crazy. It's basically, how do we know where does a certificate come from? Well, a certificate comes from a hierarchy of certificates. So at the top is something called your certificate authority. And so these are basically organizations that we trust to generate downstream certificates. So our website gets its certificate from Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is saying, I am very sure that royalpalacemedia.com is under the control of one of our customers. And that gives us the certificate so that your browser thinks it's legit. Why does your browser know to trust Cloudflare? Because your browser shipped with the fact that Cloudflare is a legitimate certificate authority in mind. So your browser trusts anything that Cloudflare says in terms of certificates. So the US could go to Cloudflare and Google, let's encrypt, and just say, guys, you are not allowed to give certificates to this list of people. You need to revoke their certificates. And then every single browser in the world that's shipped from the United States, because where else do you get your browser? It's from Google or Firefox or Microsoft, sort of, or Apple, I suppose. And they just say, look, don't recognize, they can tell Cloudflare not to recognize those domains, but they can also just say, hey, I want you to get rid of that certificate authority. We don't trust Cloudflare anymore to attest this. Now, what stops, like Liam and I could make our own certificate authority and everything would be fine. But in order for that to work, I would have to convince people to install in their browsers my root CA, we would have to tell their browsers to trust me as attesting to domain ownership. And then there's the domain name aspect, which is the US has an insane amount of control over domains generally. Especially if they wanted to, if Congress passed a law to make this easier, they could probably just shut down really quick. Congress could pass an administrative approach to this where it's just I don't know, DOJ just sends a letter and the domain gets pulled. So there's a lot of room for censorship that I think a lot of people aren't aware of existing, and that we kind of have to take for granted. I think that's where it'll be interesting. The libertarian kind of take on the internet is very much it's technology that it makes this stuff free and liberatory and whatnot. No, it's the US allowing you to do that. They could really change things if they wanted to, I think. But I think that's the thesis we've got to here.
And specifically the US. That's the key part as well.
Well, and precisely, no one else can.
Yeah, and that ties it back to the case we're talking about.
Yeah, France has passed, very forceful laws. And by the way, there's other things that we can talk about on another episode, but imagine Liam posts my address on Facebook without my permission. No, he goes around telling everyone that I had an affair with someone or just something of that nature, right? I can just get a court to force you and the provider to take it down. Easy. Because that's a violation of my private life in France. Mm-hmm. But, could I do that against an American company that doesn't really have a presence in France or is unwilling to comply with French authorities? Absolutely not, right? But imagine if the US took the same approach to France where it was so easy.
Yeah, I think we can call it there. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been the Royal Palace Podcast. See you next time.
La France est une chose, à mes yeux, très considérable. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. Je veux dire par là qu'à mon sens, elle est quelque chose de très grand. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. Il y a même là quelque chose d'extraordinaire. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. Il faut que la France joue son rôle, c'est exact. Et pour qu'elle joue son rôle, il faut qu'elle soit la France.